Erica and I are so excited about this event, about this feedback session, because it is something that comes up a lot, and there's so many different types of questions and so many different types of settings to give feedback in. We decided to start off with, we're going to address the feedback sessions that take place in sort of a larger setting. And not that we have to stay in this larger setting, but and questions down the road. And we have questions for Toby and Chithra around at what point do we want to bring in people, even if they're just a couple of people, who should those people be that we bring in for a more intimate screening session. But for now, I'm going to start with just this idea of filmmakers giving feedback on other people's, on their fellow filmmakers' films. And it was so exciting. Erica and I have been doing this since the end of 2020. We've done work in progress programs, for those that don't know, and sample trailer sessions as well, which are the ones that we have coming up on March 3rd. And it's a new, I mean, Eric, I'd like to say that I'm getting more and more comfortable in this format, but Erica, I admire her completely, because she knows how to, like, you know, manipulate, you know, and maneuver around the technology, as well as seemingly so calm and collect and intimate in her sharing. So I'm thrilled to have been working with Erica since 2020. And for those that don't know me, I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I produced and directed feature docs. And way back when, in the 90s, early 90s, realized, God, all of us are working in working in a vacuum, and there didn't seem to be a place where we can go and get feedback from people we don't know, but who are in our field. And so at the time, I brought in 10 filmmakers, and Doug was one of those filmmakers that came in, and those first 10 filmmakers, to just discuss this idea of feedback sessions. We weren't looking to invent the wheel. In fact, I connected, and my group connected with all the other organizations out there working with filmmakers, and just said, like, use us, like, this is going to be a resource for everybody. So and we were able to build our mailing list, and became eventually a not-for-profit, and really it became, you know, we grew it to thousands of filmmakers who were a part of our docu-club world back in the day. And we ended up, you know, in my offices with popcorn and wine, and then we moved to a few other spaces, and then landed, one of them being MoMA, and then we landed at the IFC Center. And it was a very exciting trajectory. And a few other people, while I was running DocuClub, were also the face of DocuClub, and they moved on to have these fabulous careers also. So in programming festivals and working in organizations. So so I'm very excited. I love community. And that is the reason that DocuClub was put together, was to create community. And so Erica is so like-minded. And so this idea of being able to create some sort of community in this very, isolated time we're in, has been enormously important for me. And I can only speak for myself at this very moment, but I also want to just say, I think Toby's film that she edited was one of our first DocuClub films, where the filmmaker Tricia Regan was holding a flashlight and reading the narration as the film was screening, and it was very exciting. But I think I'll stop there. I mean, I have a lot to say about the process, which I'm going to save for later, and I'm going to turn it over to Erica to sort of give you, so she could share her history with this,
Sure.
this forum.
Yeah, and I'll try, I mean, because it's very similar. I think it came out of the same sentiment. I'm a co-founder of what actually ended up becoming a nonprofit organization, but really started out just as a work in progress series called Docs in Progress in Washington, D.C. And it was very much influenced by DocuClub, you know, sort of saying, oh, wouldn't it be great to have something like this specifically for our DC area documentary filmmaking community? And one of the things, you know, I mean, very similar sort of setup. I would say one thing that was unique, and maybe we can get into this in the conversation later in terms of getting feedback, you know, sort of the distinctions between getting feedback from filmmakers versus broader audience, is Washington, D.C., as you know, is a very, you know, there's a lot of experts here, you know, on a lot of different topics. And so what we found, even though we didn't intend it, is we made our, you know, screenings open to the public. And we would find people, you know, either filmmakers would invite them or they would just find out about it, you know, through happenstance. And we'd get people who were experts on the particular topic of a film. And so they would have sort of their own kind of, you know, perspective that was often very helpful for filmmakers. And that's sort of something that we really treasured, you know, that it was sort of this mix. I would say typically 2/3 of our audiences were film folks and 1/3 were general public. And I think, you know, there's something, it changes the dynamic of how people see the film. And, you know, we can talk a little bit about that. But I think it created a really interesting sort of conversation and was very helpful to a lot of filmmakers. So, you know, I'll just, you know, we kind of evolved, and we also started doing kind of things that were more focused on pitches. We did something which we collaborated with the D-Word actually called Peer Pitch for many years, which we did starting in DC, but then also in several other places. I think there might even be a couple of Peer Pitch alums here. So welcome back. And yeah, and that's actually how I met Chithra when she was living in DC, you know, and she not only has workshopped her work through us, through Docs in Progress, but also came to a lot of screenings and just gave amazing feedback. So really just I'm so glad to have her back here virtually to talk with us today. And I'll be quiet now, and I'm going to turn it back to Susan to welcome our special guests and then open it up.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm so excited to have met Chithra, and Toby and I have a long history together, and I'm thrilled that she could be here as well. And I'm going to post their bios in a second, but I'm not seeing all of us on the screen, but I will start with, I think I'll introduce Chithra first, only because I just saw her pop up first. There we go. And I will post your bio in the chat, Chithra. Thank you for joining us. This is just terrific. Thank you, Toby.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you, Erica and Susan, and lovely to be with Toby and everyone here. I have an interesting sort of origin story that might sort of make sense in this moment. I used to live in Washington, D.C. And I came to filmmaking quite accidentally. I was a physical therapist living there. And in 2004, I did two things. One was I decided to fund a documentary, not having any idea of what the hell I was getting into. And the other was going to a work in progress screening that Docs in Progress had organized. So at one end, I was funding something that I had no idea what it was about, believing that documentaries are going to change the world or change ideas or change, you know, the naivety of what I was thinking is unbelievable right now. But soon in the process of making that film, the producer and the director and the project would keep telling me, but you don't know anything about filmmaking. Any question that I would ask would sort of be met with, but this is how it's done, or you don't know what you're talking about. And And so that's why I started coming to these work in progress screenings. I wanted to see what happens before something is quite finished. And so I kind of got into filmmaking at the wrong ends of the spectrum, so to speak, right? Where you don't know how, I had no idea that getting money was the hardest thing in documentary filmmaking besides making the film. And then at the other end, in post-production, the story really comes together. And that is such a difficult journey for all of us to go through. And so that's kind of how I came into filmmaking. And right now I live in New York City. I kind of would like to emphasize that I'm a multilingual filmmaker, and often in the edit, when you're dealing with foreign language or multiple languages in films, which is being predominantly shown in English-speaking countries, how edit is framed or how the story is told always sort of becomes interesting for me, and what is getting left out. I sort of also, I'm a director editor, which is sometimes frowned upon, right? Like, so I'm navigating that sometimes as a filmmaker, editing my own work, and also at the other end as an editor working with other directors, navigating to find their own stories. So I can stop at that, and delighted to be here to sort of talk about all of the messy things with editing and feedback.
Should I jump in? So I got into editing kind of through a first job. Actually, it was during college. I took a year off, and even though I thought I wanted to be a cinematographer, during this opportunity I had to be an assistant editor and watch how this is where the story gets told. At least that's how I felt. You know, it's like when you're out shooting, you get it or you don't, but in the editing room, you cannot get it many times before you get it. And I loved that process. It was like turning the process of making mistakes into a method, and the pressure of that, or the lack of pressure of that versus being in the field, really excited me. I'm remembering one of the first times I was just witness to a feedback session when I was still an assistant editor. Somebody came in, he was, I think he was the DP or one of the DPs on the film, and he just sat back, and his first question was, why should I care? Why should I care about this? And it was really harsh. And but like that phrase, just when I'm editing and when I'm watching someone else's film, I'm kind of clocking the moment I start caring. And I know that's very general, but it's just like, it was the most valuable piece of feedback I heard and carry with me. And I've worked on, I've been editing and sound editing, started with sound editing after that, assistant editing jobs, got very into the world, the sonic world. And therefore, much of my feedback when I'm screening a rough cut of someone's is, you know, wow, if you brought this, you know, sound design in here, you could completely start telling this other story. And it can be, I think, annoying for some people, but I get still very excited by that element. And yeah, I've been editing documentaries, mostly verite based as opposed to, you know, archival or historical based. And that's kind of my passion. But I love watching and sticking my 2 cents in everybody's films.
Erica, do you want me to start?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I think Erica and I decided that we were going to start asking some questions and have a dialogue with you. And then from there, open it up in about 20 minutes or so, depending on how long we get through the questions. So I'm going to start with one of the more general questions, which is like, who do you think, and based on your experience, who've been the best audiences for giving feedback? And then I'll follow it up with
yeah,
a
I'll jump in. I mean, for me, it's completely dependent on what the film is, what stage you're at, and what you're looking for. I mean, sometimes I only want people that are not filmmakers. I just want to know how a story or what parts of a story is starting to resonate with like a general audience. I find that when I, suggest people to come to a screening, the most successful ones are kind of a blend of people who are very well into the craft and can actually offer solutions that are in the world of editing, as well as people who are just reacting. But one thing I just want to make sure to bring up, because it seems like an obvious thing, but whenever you're asking for feedback, I think it's really important to state overtly who the audience is, who the intended audience is, because I go in assuming it's a general, everyone wants their film to play to a general audience. But I had this one experience where I was it was one of those labs, and we were paired off, and this was a film about the children of hip hop and rap artists. And I assumed that the reason I was asked to be a participant in this feedback was to sort of get someone who's pretty obviously outside of that world and to find out what was translating, what I was connecting with. And I had all these notes about clarity, and I don't know what this reference is, and I don't know what this means. And when you put that thing on the screen, it's like another language. And I asked before I started, I said, I just want to clarify, who is your intended audience? And they said, Black men between 18 and 30. And I was like, okay. And I just crumpled up my notes and just gave them very general feedback. But, it seems like an obvious thing, but I think it's always good to clarify.
Yeah, and not always so easy to identify also, like, that is really good to think about when you're presenting your film. Chithra?
Yeah, to add to that, I agree with what Toby's saying. I kind of like, so if I'm thinking of if either the director and myself as an editor, or if I'm looking for feedback, I sort of categorize 3 different sort of people. Like, one group of people that are sort of structural masters, really coming in to give feedback on content, clarity, structure, narrative arc, character arc, like people who can really talk about that. The other group of people, I call them therapists, because I feel like, filmmakers are coming to this point after navigating so much, right? And as Toby was saying, right, like, things don't work for a long time before they work. And it can, so sometimes you really want to be just hearing feedback from somebody who's kind of talking to you about the magic in what you have, that you haven't, this uncut diamond that's there, in someone who believes in your vision or someone who believes in your team, right? You really want to hear some of that on what is really there. And then I would say, the niche, the third is sort of, who I think, but I feel like some sort of like, niche audience for the film, like, do they see themselves represented? Is it talking to them? Do they feel seen? Do they, that is important. And then sometimes, like, I kind of put this as the 4th category of people, like funders or people who have sort of supported this project, like either you're thinking of going back to them for more money, or you want them to see the scope of where this is going, and at some stage sort of showing this kind of feedback. And then the last category of people, I really like folks who sort of give notes as they're like literally detailed notes as they're watching. They're not talking like they're I mean, they're kind of structural people, but they're giving this clip by clip on this is what's happening to me. This is what, like, they haven't read your synopsis. They don't know anything about your story, but they're just responding. And as an editor, I value that notes a lot because it's sort of like really, oh, at this moment, this is what this is doing to them. So this is kind of the broad category of people, and whatever, like sometimes it might make sense of having, you're very early in your process and you just want to go one-on-one with any of them. You might find somebody who's an amazing structural feedback person, one who's like a therapist person, one is kind of your niche audience, and if your funder is one of them, and it's just this intimate one-on-one thing. You're not ready to put it out in the public. You don't want to sit with a bunch of people. That's what you might be needing when you're super early in the process. You're testing waters, but not ready for, and then sometimes you might want to be in the stage of like, this is where I am, as in my story has come together. Now I'm bold enough to take that big step and have a room of, have these people in the room, and I want to hear them. But before hearing them, I just want to hear how they are. Like sometimes just like feeling the pulse of the room, right? How are people responding to that? Like that's interesting feedback. So yeah, that's.
Can I just follow that up really quick, Erica, before I go into you? Do you have want to just say two things. One is obviously when we could be in person, there's a lot we learn when we're watching a film with someone, right? I mean, that's also very valuable. But the question I have is there a time, when do you know you're ready for, Chithra, you mentioned so many different categories, but is there a time in which you feel you're ready for feedback? Like, what is your marker to say, okay, I'm ready to hear from an audience or from, a group of people to give me some guidance? At what point do you bring people into that process?
I think one of my editing mentors would say, like, you should have a full sentence or whatever it is, right? If it's a full paragraph, a full sentence, or like you're the storytellers, whether it's an editor, director, whoever, right? Like you have, or we have put whatever that is in, at least at this iteration, a complete realization of something. And then we're in a place where we want to test it out, whether it is a character arc, whether it is a work sample, whether it is like the first assembly or a first rough cut of like it's better if it's in a place where at that stage, at that moment, it's come to a place where it's fully realized for the creators. Otherwise, I find either being in a space where, wait, this is not there, but this, or, like having clarity on, here I am, this is what I want to know about, is a good stage. And that kind of shifts, that's a different need at different points. But yeah, like does that make sense? Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
I agree. I think for me anyway, I generally have a lot of ideas about telling a story. And I want to be able to try all those ideas out in a way that I think they make sense to me. Chances are they're not going to all work. And that's why you need feedback. But I like to be in a place where I did what I think is working. What do you think? As opposed to, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to bring this character to life. That I don't find that very helpful. I find having an assistant who's very involved, or an associate editor, as a collaborator, great for that. But in terms of an audience reacting, I want to wait till the point where I feel like, okay, I've done what I think works in this first pass.
Great. I want to just kind of add to, like, there's just so many gems that are coming out of this conversation. But I really appreciate what both of you said, just in terms of having different audiences, but also even thinking about audience. I know one of the things that we used to do with Docs in Progress with our live screenings is, we would show the film and then open up the feedback session, but there's always that moment, like right after you've watched something where you just need to kind of breathe and sort of, like we can't go right into it. So I would always sort of ask the filmmaker, the presenting filmmaker, sort of two clarifying questions. And one of them was, sort of, why did you make the film? Sometimes it's obvious from looking at the film, sometimes it's not so obvious. And then sort of that question about who do you see as sort of your target audience, which I think sometimes is hard for filmmakers to even think about. But it also made me realize that sort of there are these different ways, as you said, there's different stages, but there's also different ways of getting feedback. And sort of what Chithra was talking about, sort of like, sometimes I like the feedback that's very visceral, like I want to know as you're watching it, what your reactions are. And then there's sort of the, okay, we've just watched this film, maybe with a group of people and sort of let's have a conversation about it. But then there's also, that sort of one-on-one, or things like what we're doing here on D-Word, where, we have people watch the films in advance, they make notes, and so they come to the feedback session immediately to give feedback. And so there may be some time between watching and reviewing the film and then actually giving the feedback. And I have noticed that does change sort of the nature of the feedback. It's not that one's better or not, but I'd really love to hear from both of you sort of about that, both about sort of the time, and format of giving feedback, but also thinking about multiple audiences, and sort of the values of having, sort of like specific audiences at different points to look at the film and give feedback, or the pluses and minuses of bringing that group together to sort of build feedback off each other. So I'd love to hear any experiences, or thoughts you have about that.
I'm just thinking about, I'm on a very unusual project right now, where it's almost backwards in the way a filmmaker usually gets feedback. This is about a locked psych ward for college students in mental health crisis. And it's basically like an embedded, you're just, for the duration of the film, you're just in this place. And it was commissioned by HBO, so they're sort of the client. And I don't know if I've ever, this might be the first time I've had that, where they have to see the first rough cut, as opposed to you show it to your friends and colleagues and make sure you feel like it's in a good place before you show it to the client. But they were the first pass, and fortunately it went well. And then we had to show it to the hospital to find out, are there scenes that we love that we can't include for, legal reasons or HIPAA reasons. And then we showed it to, we just had last Sunday, a feedback screening of filmmakers and some man on street people. And it was just such a bizarre way to do it. I much prefer it the other way, because the criteria by which the HBO thing was fine, thank goodness it went well, but showing it to it wasn't the participants, but it was the institution, and them having feedback like, in that shot there's a piece of garbage on the floor, you can't show that. It's just like, this is not feedback I was looking for. But it just took a long time to get to the place where we got solid story feedback. I don't know if that answered your question at all. It probably didn't. It was just a recent experience. But I do find it really useful, as I said, that first pass where you feel like, okay, I think even if it's just like act one, I've set up the story. Are you hooked? Are you interested? Are you rooting for the central character? Whatever the issues are, I think it's really useful to have a mix of filmmakers, both editors and directors and producers, not only editors, and some other, a mix of other people who are just like, they might tune in to hear what captures them and when. And I find that a really interesting, like, when are you hooked, in terms of the walking out of the theater or turning the channel. There was something else I was going to say, but I'm going on too long. So
No, you're not. I just want to say that it's super helpful. And please do it more when you can relate your answers to real situations that you're working on. That is super helpful. So I'm going to encourage that. Like, don't think you're going on too long. I know we're all loving to hear you connect it with a story of a recent film or something like that. So that's all I just wanted to say.
To add to what Toby's saying, right? I think, you know, it's nice to have. I think if the film is further along in the process, right? Like it's really an advanced rough cut or a fine cut, maybe it makes sense to have multiple perspectives in a room. And I would add probably with somebody to moderate the session, or because there's always going to be somebody who is very eager and, you know, wanting to express and share feedback, and sometimes that can drive where the room goes or where the conversation goes, right? Like if someone or sometimes it leads a whole chorus that everybody then suddenly chimes, or someone who might have a different point of view may not speak up, right? Like, so while I like that format of viewing something with a group of people from multiple point of views, I feel like that works best or is most useful when the filmmaker and the editor are in a place where they have really wrestled with all the ideas and they know that this is probably as good as the material, and then they are sort of in a place of, you know, shifting things along. But when you're earlier in the process, I think curated, smaller, maybe one-on-one sessions are more beneficial and useful for the creative, for getting that kind of feedback is more helpful in moving along. So if you're going to do a big group setting, really think of who's going to moderate, and maybe is there a component of right in the beginning, can they write something, or can everybody get an opportunity to share something, or can you have curated questions where the quieter voices don't, I mean, yeah, they're included and they're heard and felt as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I feel like, especially when it's a larger crowd and somebody says something and it's, you know, somewhat like, I really didn't like this character, or I was very confused by this, something that would make you as an editor start going down a rabbit hole of changing something. I think having a moderator there to say, who else feels this way? Because sometimes you'll, you know, have a room full of people, nobody else agrees. And, you know, it's sort of that general sense that you kind of only want to respond to things where a large amount of people in the group feel the same way. And then sometimes, you know, everyone will raise their hand. You're like, oh, like there was a character in this last screening. We had no idea how badly he was coming off. We're kind of like, yeah, he's one of our characters. And one person said, I really don't like him. And somebody said, does anyone else feel that way? And everybody raised their hand. Like, oh,
there's a comment in the audience about directors who would not stop talking during their feedback session.
Well, I was just gonna, I saw earlier Marwin talked about how he would film his sessions, I think, during feedback. And we did that at Docu Club. I know we do it on the D-Word, we give everyone a transcript of the feedback, so you can go back, so you're not, just in case you've missed something. I'm sure Erica did that with her group as well on some, I'm not sure. Did you, Erica?
I think in the beginning we did an audio recording, and at some point it became too challenging to do that. I'm of mixed mind about this, because I think with live screenings, because I think some people are very nervous to give feedback when they feel like it's being recorded, even if it's just for the filmmakers. So I think there's a value to it.
Yeah, on the D word, we just give them a
A
transcript.
transcript.
right?
Yeah. What I'd often recommend filmmakers do, and maybe this ties in a little bit to the to Danya's comment as well, is to have somebody else, not the filmmaker, but somebody else maybe from the team, take notes, because I think there's something, you know, like when you're listening, it's one thing, and when you go back to your notes later or listen to a recording or see a transcript, it can be very different. Because again, you know, you can have, if you're so close to the material and you're suddenly hearing people get completely confused or bothered by, you know, a character that you thought was likable and they're not, you know, it's very easy to kind of just focus on that and start defending, you know, every decision you make. So I think the hardest thing actually for filmmakers, you know, I think in these sessions is to kind of just listen. And I think that, and not speak, but really focus at the same time. So I even feel like the taking of notes also takes away your focus. It focuses it somewhere else. So sort of if that can be split up, or you can get a recording. That's
I actually want to just address the issue of conflicting feedback. Toby, you mentioned a show of hands, which is really helpful, but you know, and also as the editor, when you have your director listening as well, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that relationship when you go back after a feedback screening, like what that looks like for you? If, for instance, you both heard it a little differently, like, so how do you navigate that role and what you've just, and whatever the feedback was, particularly with conflicting feedback?
That is a real tough one. I mean, if it's kind of equally conflicting, and you know, you've just got to go with the director's vision, your vision, the combined vision, and you know, believe in it. When there's something that, and I can't come up with a particular example, but if there's something where it's pretty clear this didn't land for the majority of a feedback screening, but you've worked so hard on it, and it's like, no, it has to be in there for some way, for one reason or another. You know, I think it can be very delicate, but I think it's worth really trying to make something work in as many different ways as possible. And so that if you end up, you know, pulling something out that you both wanted to be there, or one of you wanted to be there, you feel like you've given it a really fair shot. Like that actually did just happen on this film. There was a character that just was an outlier, and we all loved her, and every place we put her in the film, it felt like a different movie. And we're still wrestling. We're not 100% sure if we're going to lose her, but you know, we tried like almost every other scene, like, what if it's here? What if it's here? And it just derailed it.
I'm just looking at some of the comments that are coming on the chat window. That's kind of interesting, like sort of about, you know, the format per se, but, you know, going to sort of like this, when there's conflicting thoughts coming in, I think sometimes also like, you know, I don't know how else to sort of talk about it, as sort of like, you know, when the story, who is giving the feedback and where are they coming from? Some, you know, in the conflicting feedback, like it's kind of going beyond, okay, they're saying this, but who is saying that, and what are reading between the lines also sometimes. Yeah, what's the feedback behind the feedback, or what's the point? Like sometimes there's more to that feedback, and I think I find conflicting feedbacks interesting, because one, you know, it's that something in the material is, you know, sort of eliciting a response, and it's eliciting kind of different responses. It's interesting, right? And so then thinking about who, how, what of it, and what's in between, and sometimes results in better solutions on framing it, or like providing context or clarity as storytellers. So I like that a little bit, because often those happen, at least in places where the storytellers are already struggling with that, right? Like Toby, as you're saying, like for obvious reasons, those are not sometimes sitting well within the story for where it is, and that response and how everyone else is reading it, even if it's conflicting, is, I feel, useful information. And I also, to add to, there was another question about processing feedback, right? I think giving time and space to process feedback, and I feel like immediately after a screening, it's a very emotional space to deal with. So taking it in, but maybe fitting in some sort of, not jumping back to talk about feedback or some other, like, I think I force in some form of, there's no way I can sit by a computer or a hard drive for a couple of days or a week before having to go back to that feedback. Like, I feel like if we built that into the conscious practice of, I'm going to get this feedback around this time, I really need to check out before the team can get together and talk about it. That way, if it's a team, the editor has time to sort of think about it, but not work on it. And the director has had the same time to sort of do that. And then they've had some moment to think about before they can come back together to sort of navigate that with cooler heads.
Can I just jump in? I want to just respond to, I think I saw it a couple of times, about a dislikable character. And I find that, yes, so I think it can be interesting to have someone who is like this thorn in the story. And it's, as long as it's compelling, I think that's fine. In the case that I was referring to, this was someone you have to trust in terms of the story. You have to trust the work he's doing in order to sort of carry the story forward. But I think it's really interesting, like, the show Succession, I hate everyone and I cannot stop watching. But there was one other thing I just wanted to say about when you're asking for feedback. I think it's really important not to say, so we think we're at a fine cut and we feel like we have 2 more weeks, unless you're, going to be delivering, you have to deliver in a short time frame. But I feel like that really makes it difficult as a viewer to be honest and to like fully respond. Because there's sometimes where you're looking at something that the filmmakers think is really almost done, and there's a very significant fundamental problem, and you might be afraid to bring it up. So I think that would be like something I would ask, like, it's great to say what kind of feedback you're looking for, that I find useful, but not to say, well, we think we're almost done here.
Right. I mean, that is a criteria that we try to have with our screenings, because otherwise, what's the point of a feedback session if you only have 2 weeks? But Erica, I mean, it's about 12:50.
Yeah, I was gonna ask like one last question, and then I think we can open it up for audience questions. And once we get through this question, we'll turn the recording off. And just a reminder again, if you want to get in line to ask a question, if you can click the raise hand function and we'll acknowledge you. But I actually wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit, because the reason that we actually did this session, there was a discussion that came up in one of our classic face-to-faces probably about a month ago that was about feedback. And we've been talking a lot about taking feedback. We haven't talked a lot about giving feedback. And so I think, something that would be really helpful is sort of to talk about what are some strategies for giving feedback, like when someone comes to you, especially if they're at a point where maybe they don't know what they're looking for in the feedback, like what are some questions that you would want to consider before you give someone feedback, and just also keeping in mind that, you know, I love the word that Chithra used in terms of therapist, because I think, you know, our work, because filmmaking is so hard, you know, and often we're working for many, many months, if not years, on a project, and it often gets tied into our whole being. It's sometimes hard to sort of distinguish between the creative work and yourself. And so sometimes that's why people get very defensive when people don't seem to understand what their vision is. So I'd love maybe if we could talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up for more questions.
Chithra, you go first.
Sure. I think, you know, having, you know, I think condescending feedback really does, I mean, being unkind to people, like, I don't know, sometimes I've been in spaces or I've heard, or, you know, where the feedback is not necessarily kind of about the people, but the way it's packaged is kind of, sometimes, especially to emerging filmmakers or people who are really, maybe not emerging filmmakers, but they're really early in the process of putting the story together. And, you know, part of what we're doing is experimenting and navigating and really finding the story, right? Like, so I think saying something about why this is not working, or, you know, it's talking about the process versus having, even when, you know, sometimes the way it is said, it is not, you're too inexperienced, or you don't know what you're doing, or, you know, speaking about, instead of talking about or helping them, okay, these are, you know, 6 other films that you can watch, or, you know, have you considered doing A, B, and C? Like, I feel like that not just about being constructive criticism, but really sort of not like telling, like, not being, telling somebody you're not the right person, you're not doing it. Like, it happens so many times in so many settings that I feel when we are giving feedback to really, you know, take a moment to think through that. And then, and like Toby was saying, sometimes people are where they are. If they think they are finished, it's, you know, whether the project is ready or doesn't seem finished. Some people, sometimes we are spent, like we don't have the resources or the energy or whatever is left to go on to do. Like, you know, maybe the person is in that place where what they want is what they want, and sort of being respectful of that, okay, given what they are saying they are in, what is it that we can add or not to get to that place, right? I think are sort of, and then, yeah, similarly, like, and then the third thing, and this happens often with projects where a director is editing, right? And I'm going to sort of speak about that. And I fully understand that we want collaborators, we want multiple points of view in navigating the story. But there's also a ground reality for a lot of documentary filmmakers. You know, editing costs a lot of money, and they're doing, like, so, you know, and sometimes directors are the best editors for their film. Like, I think kind of giving blanket response of like, hey, you need to get an editor on board because that's how all of this is done, is so not helpful sometimes. Like, so I think getting to know where they are, and given whatever, because films are made by all, like documentary films are made by a wide range of filmmakers with a wide range of resources, with a wide range of intention. So meeting that moment and the person's need with kindness and with resources that we can point them to would be super helpful.
Yeah, and I think to extend the therapist metaphor, I think sometimes just saying, okay, how can I help? And give them the opportunity to say, you know, exactly what you're saying, what kind of feedback they want. I think like a really specific one is, I know it's at least 10 minutes too long. I want to know where you're bored and what you could lose. So that's something that's concrete. And then if you know that before you're screening, you're kind of watching for those places where, oh, this went. I mean, it's a lovely scene unto itself, but it is saying the same thing for the full 5 minutes. You could accomplish this in, you know, this time. I am a little conflicted myself with this idea that I've heard, which is you should not be prescriptive. You should only identify problems. And I do some teaching, and I feel like for my students, you know, let them figure it out, tell them where the problems are. But when it's a feedback screening for colleagues, I don't know, I can't help myself. Sometimes I just feel like, oh my God, if you brought in the sound design here, or something, it's hard to resist that. So I think it's something to keep in your mind, that it's maybe more helpful to identify where you're having problems, and kind of what Chithra, you were saying, this like just response. I was completely pulled in here. This scene, for some reason, my mind started wandering, as opposed to cut the scene out, remove it. But I'm really curious what everyone here thinks about that. Like, when do you want a prescriptive solution? Move this. If you open the film with this scene, you would have set up everything that there's a payoff for now, or do you not want to hear that?
It's interesting because I think because people get their films in advance, there are those feedback giver, you know, there are these folks who really do offer that feedback along those lines that a filmmaker could take or not take. But I'd love to hear what other people have to say. But I just also, you know, it was discussed a little bit before. I just want to address the fact how important it is to have a moderator in some of these larger screenings, because, you know what I mean? I think that the moderator could be in touch and clear with the filmmaker as to what they're looking for, and just help direct certain feedback, or at least even process it afterwards, if that is possible. Not always so possible, but I want to just make sure I accentuate the idea of a moderator at some of these larger feedback sessions.
And then I think one more sort of, I think we get better at receiving feedback when we also give a lot of feedback. And I would urge sort of going, making an effort to sort of be that person, because I think, that builds empathy all around, right? Also empathy for, as a filmmaker, when we are receiving feedback, we kind of understand where that person is coming from. And if we are in a space of giving feedback, to sort of give it in a way that, okay, I know what that other, like shifting roles and being part of all those places helps too.